From 1979 to 1983, Texas Instruments released hundreds of pieces of software. Most of it was on cartridge, and a lot of those were games. Now, a lot of people know about Parsec, Munchman, TI Invaders, Hunt the Wumpus, Alpiner, Car Wars. Those are the biggies. Those are the common cartridges. But a lot of games kind of fell through the cracks, especially toward the end. A lot of the projects that came out in the last half of 1983, at the end of the TI's sales lifespan, were sort of left behind. They didn't get a lot of reviews at the time, and those games have sort of gotten lost in the shuffle a little bit. Now, sometimes a game like that can be your new favorite because it's a weird, unexplored treasure to be found, and sometimes it's obscure for a reason. Where do these two fall? You'll just have to watch and find out, because today we're tackling Treasure Island and Munchmobile. It's easy to forget how things were when these games were new and full price, and you might get one cartridge to last you a month or longer. A lot of us, myself included, got our computers after they were discontinued, when software was cracked and copied by the diskful. Even if you were just buying cartridges, the mail order catalogs were offering big discounts, and you'd wind up getting 5 or 10 or 15 at a time. And when you do that, it's a lot less likely you'll give a game a chance if it doesn't make a good first impression. Way easier to pop out the cartridge and throw in a proven winner than to really get the hang of something weird or clunky. Years later, you realize you've owned a Munchmobile cartridge this whole time and probably never logged more than 10 minutes of actual game time trying to figure it out. In my defense, the game feels like they went out of their way to make it irritating. The theme music is this single-voice repetitive melody that wears out its welcome about 15 seconds into your first game. The graphics are big and chunky, the Munchmobile trundles down the road at a serene touring speed, and the game's calling card is so objectively goofy it takes you a few minutes to even adjust to what's happening. Munchmobile is a port of the SNK arcade game Joyful Road, and it asks the burning question, what if cars had hands? Specifically, big grabby hands on the end of long extending arms, and what if cars still needed gas but also ate fruit, and then had to throw away apple cores and cherry pits? This is the only SNK game released for the 99 4A. They also made a game called Fantasy, which exists out there as a ROM but never made it to store shelves. Now, I've never played Joyful Road, but it takes about 2 minutes of watching it in action on YouTube to realize the TI got the most stripped-down, bargain basement, half-assed conversion they could shovel out the door. Our Munchmobile compares to the arcade Joyful Road about as well as Atari 2600 Pac-Man with the real thing. Now, I had a brief glimmer of hope when I actually figured out the controls, which I'm not sure I ever bothered doing before. You see, you can't control which side of the car your Munchmobile reaches out from. You have to see which way it's looking. The hand extends, and if it hits a bush or a trash can or some other obstacle, you get hurt and the hand throbs and you can't retract it for a few seconds. Otherwise, if your hand passes over the items you're trying to pick up, and then you press the button again to bring it in theory at least, you get that thing. You get fuel this way, plus you earn points for money bags, fruit, fish, etc. You're supposed to be able to discard apple cores and whatnot in the trash cans, but I couldn't even get the game to recognize that I was picking stuff up a good bit of the time. You can't stop the car from rolling, although you can speed up slightly, and when the road shifts diagonally, the response time of trying to pick things up and move the Munchmobile is often too much for the game. As you can probably see, it's not really a car driving or racing game at all. But then there are these weird tunnels where other cars do come at you and you have to dodge them, and in those, the mechanics of driving suddenly change. By this point, I'm feeling really bad for any kid who got stuck with Munchmobile as their only game back in 1983. Maybe their parents heard of Munchman and grabbed the wrong one, or maybe Munchmobile was the cheapest clearance title at the Toys R Us Christmas liquidation sale. But one day of Christmas vacation with this and only this and TI Basic to keep you company, and I can see why so many 99 4As wound up abandoned in the attic. Playing it for a while has shown me that Munchmobile isn't as bad as I originally thought, but it's still so slow and poorly executed and unwieldy that nothing it's offering is worth the nightmares I'm going to have for the rest of my life going Treasure Island is another obscure arcade conversion, this one from Data East, and once again when you look at the cabinet game and then see the TI screen, you're probably thinking we're in for another major screw job here. On the original, you're traversing diagonal isometric paths in some hellish combination of Congo Bongo and Crystal Castles. On the TI, you find yourself on a wildly simplified playfield consisting of a bunch of weirdly intersecting horizontal and vertical lines. It looks like you're trying to climb a March Madness playoff bracket. The idea is that you're going upward while the island is sinking into the sea. You're picking up treasures, using tunnels to get in and out of tight spots, avoiding the locals, and trying not to trip over any skulls or get beamed by boulders falling out of the tunnel entrances. You can throw boulders, too, which traverse the paths and hopefully will knock out a monster or gorilla. We only get 2 types of bad guy in the home game. It takes a while to get your bearings at all. This game is chaotic and frantic right off the bat. As you get used to things, you start navigating the paths a little more surely, knowing when to get away from the bottom edge near the encroaching water and which treasures aren't worth the climb off the escape path to retrieve. You learn to try to keep an eye on the falling boulder and on the monsters on screen because when one goes off the bottom edge into the water, another is going to respawn in a tunnel entrance, and it's probably going to be right on top of you. As radical a change as the TI playfield is, I'm glad they made it this way. The controls are fairly responsive as is, but you do occasionally slide by a junction like your character's wearing socks on linoleum, and I'm thinking going the diagonal route wouldn't have done the response time any favors. And the way they present the pathways, it's more or less just a maze game, with some very intriguing dead ends in later levels, but it doesn't feel like a maze while you're playing. It's a cool look and a really interesting approach. The cave entrances are super dangerous places, and it's essential to keep an eye on what's happening on the rest of the screen before you pass one. Using them as teleports can be risky, because you never know which one you'll come out of, sometimes the same one you went into. Sometimes you pop out right on top of a monster or a boulder, and there's no way to avoid losing a life. Once you start getting to the higher levels, the game action bogs down a bit when there's a lot of stuff on the screen, which adds to the air of kind of unfortunate cheapness and last-minute feel to the presentation. Not that the world is clamoring for it, but I feel like a remake of this game now, with what we know about coding and an eye toward more truly replicating the arcade experience, would be an absolute banger. But don't get me wrong, glitches and all, I'm having fun with Treasure Island. The constantly sinking terrain adds a fast-paced panic to Treasure Island that really gives it that arcade jolt. The learning curve is steep, and again, if this wasn't the only game you were stuck with after Christmas, it might be easy to assume it's just unplayably weird and throw it in a shoebox under the computer desk. But Treasure Island has a lot going for it, and it's rewarding to get the hang of it. I'm obviously still pretty terrible at it, but I could see mastering the pathways of each level, then going back and trying to speedrun the whole thing, or revisiting each level with a goal of picking up 100% of the treasures and leaving no loot behind. A goal that might take me, personally, years to achieve. So there you have it. I feel like both of these conversions were rush jobs of licenses nobody was really all that excited to have picked up in the first place. I'm not sure Joyful Road ever even made it to arcades outside of Japan, and I don't think anyone was clamoring for the official home computer take on Treasure Island. But while Munchmobile is slow and ponderous, and sometimes you're not even sure if it works right, Treasure Island kind of accidentally became its own frenetic hit just because of the limitations placed on it by time and hardware. Ironically, while neither card is as common as the big TI games, Munchmobile is usually a lot cheaper and easier to find on the secondary market, while Treasure Island is in that class with Fathom, Moonsweeper, and the MBX games. You can usually always find one, but you'll probably pay a little bit more for it. Of course, all these files have long since been made available on floppy disks for emulation and on the Final Grom multi-cart system. Sound off in the comments. I would love to know what you think of these two mid-level classic titles. If you've racked up high scores or have strategy tips on either one, share them. And what other underrated games do you fly the flag for? We'll see you next week with more gaming adventures in the War Room.